So I'm very sorry. I don't took me to read it. No, it's great stuff. Really great stuff. I mean, I still love Jogan. He frustrates me every time I try to read
Oh,
him.
wait. We don't need you anymore. We've got the real Brad Warner. Brad, we were just. Can you wait a second? I got a blank space. You got to turn your camera on. Just in case you didn't make it, we were practicing. We had a backup standby Brad Warner. We were practicing in here. Andrus, we don't need you anymore. We got the real thing.
Probably would be better.
Hold on a second. Let me just make sure I give the final invites to folks. Brad, it's an honor to have you here. Good to have you.
Well, thank you.
How was your tea?
It was fine. How was yours?
Okay, 1 second. Which is your, no, wait a second. BradZenkai one. That's not what I need now.
I'm going to turn off other things.
Okay. Sharing. Okay, closing that. Let me just get a check on the camera angles for everybody here. Okay, you look good. As good as you're going to look anyway. Let me get these folks. Give me a wave, everybody, on group 2 if you can see Brad okay. Brad, we're the Sangha that needs to do, you're going to be used to this as a musician. We need to do a sound check. Would you give me a sound check, please?
Me? What, say things? Like talk and say things like this and say
a
them?
sound check. Like a...
What, check 1, 2? That's actually the worst thing to do in a sound check is check 1, 2.
Can you guys on Hangout number 2 here? Give me a wave. You heard Brad okay? Okay, you guys on 1, you heard okay? All right, let me look at the time. Well, wait, let's take a breath for a couple of seconds. And we'll get ready to go. Group 2 there, they see you okay? They see everything? Group 2, you see me okay? Wave, wave. Give me a wave. Group 1? Excellent. Brad, you ready to go?
Sure, I don't even know what's happening, so...
I'm going to start with a brief introduction, say hi, a back-to-back, then we're going to sit for, I guess, about 25 minutes. Actually, Shingen, he's in Canada. He's going to give us the verse to open the sutras, then you're going to talk?
No, okay.
How long are you going to talk for?
I don't have anything really prepared. I'll just talk as long as I think. Is there a Q&A thing? I thought there was.
Yeah,
a Q&A.
no, definitely. We got Q&A. We got people at home too who are going to be emailing me.
I work better if prompted. So I'll just say a couple of words and then we'll see if that can.
Okay, let's get started. Everyone, gasho. Welcome to a very special BradZenkai with Brad Warner. You've probably heard of him. He is my most honored and welcome brother in the Dharma. Over on my corner there, you will see on the altar a picture of Nishijima Roshi. I got a hunch he would be smiling right now to see this. We have people in 2 hangouts here. Let me count the number. We may have an opening for someone on the waiting list. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 1 person on the waiting list. First come, first served. You can jump in there on hangout number 1, I think. And our Sangha, that should be everybody there. Brad is the author of many books that you're familiar with. I haven't read any of them, but I hear that they're pretty good. The latest one is, your latest book is called what, Hardcore Zen? That's the one we're promoting tonight, Brad?
No, it's Don't Be a Jerk. I think I have a few over here.
It's okay. Are you signing them for the folks here later?
Sure, if they want.
Okay. Don't Be a Jerk is available at, we still have bookstores. Are they still available in actual bookstores, Brad?
Yeah, they're pretty widely available in the bookshops. So that this one's doing fairly well, so that's nice. Also, we sell them off our website, hardcorezen.info. I make slightly more money if you buy them off the website, but it takes longer for you to get them. So
Should we avoid Amazon for because it's part of the military-industrial complex?
yeah, there's all that too.
Okay. Well, I think everyone's ready here. We're just going to start with a little Zazen for about 25 minutes, and then after that, I'll let Brad take over things. Okay? I'll ring the bell here. Everyone, you know what to do.
I'm going to go face my door. So.
Assume the position. All right. Well, I know we have a lot of Shobogenzo fans here, and a lot of people who are introduced by Brad to Zazen. So we're just going to get started. I'm going to ask Shingen, who's our Hino, to recite the verse to open the sutras for us. Everyone in Gassho, please. Brad has to run off. You can hear by the sound of police sirens and gunshots. He's in L.A. So.
Yeah.
The Dharma, incomparably profound and infinitely subtle, is always encountered yet rarely perceived. Now we see, hear, receive, and maintain this. May we all realize the Tathagata's true meaning. The Dharma, incomparably profound and infinitely subtle, is always encountered yet rarely perceived. Now we see, hear, receive, and maintain this. May we all realize the Tathagata's true meaning. The Dharma, incomparably profound and infinitely subtle, is always encountered yet rarely perceived. Now we see, hear, receive, and maintain this. May we all realize the Tathagata's true meaning.
All you, Brad.
Oh, now I gotta talk?
Yeah, I see with the water bottle you're doing a Ted Cruz there.
What, Ted Cruz drinks out of a water bottle?
Anyway, all yours.
Well, good morning. So usually, as I said, maybe some of you weren't there in the beginning, I work better when I'm prompted. We did an event a couple of days ago at this bookstore in Los Angeles in which my friend Steve Reifel appeared and prompted me for an hour, and that went really well. When I'm on my own, I tend to get a little unfocused. But I'll tell you a little about the book, and maybe we can talk about something. I'm looking at it. It's Don't Be a Jerk. The genesis of Don't Be a Jerk is actually in the intro to Don't Be a Jerk, which is that I was in a comic book store with a friend of mine, and she spotted this book, which I don't have a copy of myself, called God is Disappointed in You, in which a guy had taken the entire Christian Bible, Old and New Testaments, and rewritten it in his own words. And my friend said, why don't you try that with Shobogenzo? And my first reaction was, that's impossible to do with Shobogenzo, because it's not like the Bible. It's not like a bunch of narrative stories that you can just tell in your own words with a little bit of philosophy stuck in between. It's all philosophy with only a couple of narrative stories. So but I was intrigued by the idea, so I just got out my Shobogenzo's various versions and started seeing if I could do that to it. And I did. So worked on the first 21 chapters. I can check, right? Can't I? Oh, no, I can't check because they're all mixed up. Anyway, first 21 or 20 chapters. It's based mainly, actually I was working on some of the follow-up to it, and it's still sitting here on my little table. So I'm working from various translations, the Nishijima Cross Shobogenzo, well, you can't see it there, the Tanahashi Shambhala-san San Francisco Zen Center one, which is gigantic. Sometimes consulting the old Kosen Nishiyama one, which is a little difficult. And then I got Gudo Nishijima's 12-volume Gendai Goyaku Shobo Genzo, which contains a reproduction of the woodblock version from I can't remember when, 1600s I think was when it was produced, which is as close as you can get to the original words. What Dogen wrote. So trying to put that in a vernacular and trying to make it accessible to normal people nowadays, because I kind of feel like Shobo Genzo has, like a lot of Buddhist scriptures, become kind of the pet property of either scholars or people who are just deeply Dogen nerdy. So they the translations, including Nishijima Roshi's translation, which I think is the best one, are really, really difficult, because you're trying to take something that's 800 years old and make a true representation of that for an audience who are sort of already deeply committed to trying to sift through this thing. I don't feel there's some question. The more I study it, the more I realize how many questions there are about Shobo Genzo. But there's some question about who Dogen even produced Shobo Genzo for. But there are indications within the text that it wasn't produced for. Certainly was not produced for an audience of scholars 800 years later. That's for sure. It was probably preached to his students, his little group of monks there, as well as interested lay people who might show up at the temple on days when a lecture was given. As well as he did write this stuff down, which is unusual. Not unprecedented within the history of Buddhism, but unusual, because a lot of what we get from the Buddhist teachers of old is sort of secondhand, meaning somebody attended a lecture, or a student attended a lecture by some teacher and wrote down notes, or hung out with a teacher and wrote down notes. So what you're often getting in these in the writings that we have from famous Zen teachers is somebody else's filtering of what they said. Dogen wrote this stuff down himself with the clear intention of making this written stuff available to somebody. And like I say, we're not entirely clear who he was writing for. But the stuff has been preserved. It has a kind of a twisted history, in that it was preserved for hundreds of years without very many people looking at it. I just read recently how many copies of the various fascicles of Shobo Genzo existed during Dogen's lifetime, and now I can't remember how many it was, but I think it was in the low hundreds. So there were a few hundred copies of these various fascicles circulating among people, among who we don't really know. But the organization that Dogen started, Soto organization, became rather successful in Japan. I believe it's the #1 Zen sect. I don't know if it's the number. I think Jodo Shinshu and maybe Nichiren beat it in terms of overall Buddhism in Japan, but it's certainly the biggest Zen version of Zen. Sorry, there's scuzz on my thing. But it was not supported by. It wasn't because his literature inspired so many people. It wasn't because Dogen's writings inspired so many people. It was more because these temples were very popular, and there's a whole twisted history there of the Soto organization, which I honestly don't know that much about because I'm more kind of concerned with Dogen than with the Soto organization. What happened much later was that when Japan started to open itself up to the West, there was a push to westernize and push to kind of try to make Japan compete on par, even before the Meiji Restoration, with the West. And one of the edicts that was handed down from the emperor or whoever was deciding these things at the time was that every Japanese religion had to have a book, because every Western religion had a book. And that got the people in the Soto organization to go, hey, we got a book. It's in the basement. It's called Shobogenzo. Nobody's looked at it for 500 years, but here it is. And but at first they didn't publicly disseminate the Shobogenzo. It wasn't. It was actually they petitioned the Japanese government to restrict the printing of Shobogenzo to the Soto people themselves. So it wasn't widely available. After the Meiji Restoration, though, is this boring? I'll just keep going and we'll see if this sparks any question. After the Meiji Restoration, there was a push for, again, an even harder push for Japan to compete in terms of the West, and it became, a lot of Japanese people became interested in finding philosophers in the history of Japan who were as good as Western philosophers. So this led to people rediscovering Shobogenzo as a work of philosophy, particularly a guy named Watsuji in the 1920s, and that sparked a wider interest in Shobogenzo. And this is around when Gudo Nishijima came into the picture. He was a young man at this time, and the story that I heard from him was that he used to like to hang out at used bookstores, which is something he and I have in common. And he came across Shobogenzo and was leafing through it and saw that it was, he'd heard of Shobogenzo, but he saw that it was a book written in his own language, Japanese, that he couldn't understand. And that was kind of a challenge, and he wanted to understand this Shobogenzo. So sometime probably in his late teens or early 20s, he became a bit of a Shobogenzo obsessive, which carried on for the rest of his life. And he produced first, as I showed you, the I won't be able to quickly find the copyright date on this thing, but I believe it's in the 70s sometime. He produced the Gendai Goyaku Shobogenzo, the translation to contemporary Japanese Shobogenzo. And then with his student Mike Cross, he produced what was, at the time, the only available full English translation of Shobogenzo. The Nishiyama Kosen Nishiyama and John Stevens version preceded the Nishijima Cross version, but it was impossible to find. When I wanted to do the research on this book, I had to be like, I had to put an eBay alert and all this stuff. You know, I couldn't find it anywhere. Finally, got myself a full set for $100, which was a bargain because some people wanted like thousands of dollars for individual copies of this thing. And so the Nishijima Cross version was for, let's say, 10 years or so, the only complete English translation of Shobogenzo, up until well, maybe probably more than 10 years. Anyway, the San Francisco Zen Center version came out 2010 or so. So that's also a complete version. Shasta Abbey, an organization here in California, came out with their complete Shobogenzo, which I think might be copied from the Nishijima Cross Shobogenzo. I don't say that too loudly, but the more I work with the Shasta Abbey version, the more I find these kind of like, why does theirs is worded exactly like the Nishijima Cross version? So makes me wonder the origin of that one, but not to disparage them. So that's it. That's where I came in. So with the wide availability of legitimate versions of Shobo Genzo finally being the case, where there's 4 complete editions available, at least 3 of them are easily available, with the other one being available but very hard to get, and maybe half a dozen or more incomplete versions of Shobo Genzo, Moon in a Dewdrop, and Refining Your Life, and oh god, there's a bunch of them. I have a whole shelf full of them in there where people have taken a few pieces of Shobo Genzo and translated them into English. I figured anybody who really wants the legit version of Shobo Genzo now can get it. So the time is right for a terrible pop culture version of Shobo Genzo. And the cover kind of gives away. I don't know if it's there. We go. This is my feelings on what I'm doing with this. A lot of people interpret this cover drawing in various ways, but what I talked to the artist about doing was this. The concept. I didn't draw this, but the concept was basically mine. The monster is destroying. I sent him some pictures of Eiheiji, and he didn't quite render it exactly like Eiheiji, but he's supposed to be destroying Eiheiji in the same way as I am destroying Dogen's masterwork here in this book. So that's that. I don't know exactly what sort of an audience I'm talking to, so I'm kind of I kind of want to keep my presentation short and then see what people want to talk about, because I don't know what, maybe I've just bored all of you into complete numbness for the last 20 minutes. So let's see if you have any questions.
Yeah, I guess we'll go to the question and answer. Let me tell you how I'm going to work this. First off, I got to get you to do a Godzilla impersonation right now over the people. You look like, a monster over the little people of Tokyo right there. Yeah, there they are. Right. Yeah. Okay, anyone with a question, here's what we're going to do. We have people on the waiting list at home. They're going to email me if they have a question, and anyone who's in our groups, kind of wave your hands so I can see who has a question, and I'll try to spot you. We'll get as many people as we can. Who's got a question? Wave your hands.
Looks complicated. That guy does.
Oh, okay. This is Eugen. He's in Maine.
Yeah, the guy in the corner of the screen. Hi, Brad. Thank you very, very much. So you've led up to the question I had been thinking about the last couple of days in preparing to visit with you today. You've mentioned a couple of things. That in your cover, Eheiji's being destroyed.
Yeah.
That Dogen has been well covered by scholars, traditionalists, people who sort of know their way around. Which leads me to, what is the niche you were seeking to fill? You're clearly forward-looking and have a direction you'd like to go in, which may say something about where you think Zen is headed in North America, or your take on it. Now, I wanted to ask you that. What's being destroyed?
Well, I'm destroying Dogen's book, which is that's one thing. I get variations on this question with every book, and it's a slightly different question, but I think it's similar in who are you writing this for, and what's your intended audience, and what's your intended purpose. Mostly when I write a book, personally, my intended purpose is to study that subject for myself. So my number one interest in doing this book and following it up with another one is to find out for myself what's in there, what's in Shobo Genzo. Because for years I accepted the Nishijima Cross English version, and it's interesting to look. It's real interesting for me to look at these other translations and to look at the original and see how we got what we got. So that's number one. I don't have any great purpose. I'm not. I don't know where Zen is going in the West these days. I travel a lot. I go to Europe. I've been going to Europe every year for the past 6 or 7 years and spending like a couple of months over there traveling various countries and giving lectures and meeting with people and stuff, and traveling around the U.S. and a bit in Canada as well. So I've visited a lot of Zen places and seen a wide variety of things going on. You know, there are places where they're trying their best to be Japanese, even when they're not Japanese. There are places where they've totally thrown out anything Japanese and trying to completely rebuild the whole thing. I've seen some, I've written about some abuses that I've seen, but actually more than that, I've seen people who are extremely sincere, who are trying to do something good with this. And we don't know what it is. So Zen, Buddhism in general, and Zen in particular, has traveled through various countries and been shaped by those societies that it encounters, and has affected those societies. So it always has to adapt, and it always has to change a little. And so everybody's concerned. One of the main concerns I get from a lot of people is, how do we keep the important bits and change what needs to be changed just in order to reach this particular society that we're in? Because you don't want to throw out the good stuff, but there's a lot of cultural stuff in there that's probably not that important. I think it takes time, and I don't think we have had enough time to exactly figure out that part of it. So in a sense, I don't. There's a lot of people who get really bent out of shape over encountering Zen places where they seem to be trying to adhere to the forms they've received from Japan or from Korea, mainly. When they're doing it in Germany or wherever, Hoboken or somewhere. And then they go, oh, they're just trying to be Japanese. But I understand that for a lot of people, it's like, well, let's just do this the way it's been received, and then we'll figure out how to change it. So a lot of people are stuck in that phase, and I don't think it's good to too quickly throw everything out. I have a kind of an unusual, sorry I'm rambling, I have a kind of unusual relationship to that because I lived in Japan for 11 years, so I don't, my take on it is sort of, after you live in a foreign country for that long and speak another language all the time for that long, it starts to seep into your brain and body. So I feel like, in a bit of a way, I can be a bit of a bridge for that, to try to see what's important. But I don't know. I guess the answer overall is I don't know what my intended audience is or what I'm doing with this book. I just kind of try to put it out in a way that I understand it, and then hope that resonates with people. It's been interesting with this book in particular because it's selling better than my last few books. So I'm surprised, and I think my publishers have been surprised too, because they they were a little tepid about the book when I presented them with the idea. They liked the idea and they wanted to publish it, but they were sort of like, well, we don't know if this is going to sell. And they went into a second printing within 6 weeks, I think, of the book's release, which is that's fast. Usually a publisher tries to print a year's worth of books at least in advance. So if what they thought would sell in a year sells out in 6 weeks, that means that there's a lot more people interested in the book than they thought would be interested in the book. So we'll see where this goes. You know, as I said, I'm working on a second volume of Dogen translations. And I'm just kind of going, well, I don't know. You know, people went for one. I don't know if they're going to go for two. So we'll see if there's real interest in Dogen or not.
Okay,
Well,
I'm sorry.
you haven't rambled at all, and I really appreciate your thoughtful answer. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Wave your hands like crazy if you got a question, because I'm. All right, wait a second. Where are we going here?
I don't know anybody's name, so I can't.
We're going to Kyonin in Mexico.
No, in Mexico.
Thank you. Hi, Brad. Thank you for being here with us.
Where are you in Mexico?
Pardon me?
What part of Mexico?
Oh, I'm in Guadalajara, near the Pacific coast.
I've been there.
Oh!
Yeah.
No, well, whenever you come here, you have a home here, right?
Okay, well,
Just
we
let
should
me know.
talk, actually.
Kyonin, let me mention, Kyonin, by the way, is one of our trainee priests, as was the first fellow. I hope some of our non-priest folks here ask some questions too. Be brave. But Kyonin's one of our priests here at Tree.
Thanks.
Well, first of all, thank you, Brad, for being here with us today. And a couple of things I want to mention and one question. First of all, thank you for putting up this book for us, because to me, Shobogensu is a little bit hard because all the translations are mostly in English.
Yeah.
We have some translations in Spanish, but they're like pretentious Spanish. You know, it's hard to understand even for us.
Yeah.
So having your book is for me very valuable because I can compare and validate what I have been learning for a number of years now. So thank you for your book. It's invaluable for me, and I'm sure for a lot of non-speaking audience or readers. I love the cover because I'm a nerd and I love kaiju, so it's awesome. And my question is, how are young people reacting to your book? Do you have any comments on that?
How are young people? Okay.
I mean, less than 20 years old, younger than 25 years old, because the language you use is very accessible for younger readers. So, have you heard of how young people are taking your book?
Well, I can give you one example from the other day. I was in a bookstore, and it was a bookstore where I gave a talk. But this is a couple days before I gave the talk. I just wanted to see whether they had the book, and they had it on the shelf. And as I'm walking by, this little girl could have less than 10 years old is like picks up the book and showing her mom like, look at this book, you know. And I turned around and I said, you know, I wrote that book. So 10-year-olds like it, at least because of the cover. I haven't. I don't really know. A lot of people who write to me don't tell me how old they are, so I just have to guess. The audiences that I've been seeing talking about this book seem to be mainly younger audiences when I've been traveling and talking about it, and they seem to like it. I always wonder, you know, my first book, Hardcore Zen, was really marketed hard to a young audience, right? And so one of the first places I went to give a talk about Hardcore Zen was, I think it was in New Mexico. It was somewhere in the American Southwest, maybe Arizona, New Mexico. And in most of the audience is young people in their 20s and 30s, and right in the front are these two women who appear to be around 60, you know, years old. And I thought, oh, these poor women, they wandered into the wrong place, and they're going to be so disappointed in this lecture. But you know, I just did my thing. And then there was a little afterwards. There was a book signing, and those two women were the first ones in line. And they had their Hardcore Zen, and they go, "We love this book, and it's just wonderful." So I thought, oh, it's not really for a young audience or an old audience. It's just for whoever wants to read it. So I'm not really exactly writing for a young audience. I'm trying to write for a contemporary audience. So I'm trying to, like you said about the Spanish, I haven't seen the Spanish editions of Shobo Genzo, but a lot of times when people are writing English, Shobo Genzo and also other texts, you know, when they're translating, there does tend to be this pretentious quality to it, and it's really difficult. I kind of feel like who are you trying to impress, you know, when you're writing this? Especially the language becomes kind of a barrier. Because of doing this, I'm for the first time starting to read some of the scholarly books about Dogen, because I studied with Nishijima Roshi, and he had his Shobo Genzo version, and he was lecturing about it, and so I just didn't really feel for those years like there was any real need for me to look for other scholarly interpretations of Dogen. But these days, if I'm going to try to make a good book for people, I'm going to have to look at what the other scholars, what scholars, I don't think I'm a scholar, what they have said about it. And what's really interesting is, number one, I'm finding that Nishijima's interpretation of Shobo Genzo isn't as unusual as I suspected originally. I thought maybe I was going to find out that his take on it was really different from other people's, and it's not. You know, it's pretty. His version of Shobo Genzo is pretty standard interpretation. But the other thing is, when you read these books, I'm reading them in English, which is my own language, and I have to stop and look up words all the time. It's very annoying because. You know, and then I'll look up this word, and I think, why did you use that word? Because you could have said a more common word that means the same thing. So why are you making me go to a dictionary and look up this stupid word that you've used? That sort of thing, I don't quite understand the reason for that. So as far as young people, there's I think they probably like it, but I don't know who I'm hearing from. It's interesting to take it to other countries too. I haven't taken the book to any other countries yet. But when I was touring Europe last year, I had finished most of it. So I printed up some of the individual pieces and read them as lectures. In Germany and Finland and England and some other places, Netherlands, I think I did it too, and it was it's interesting to see, because I'm also trying to write. Whenever I'm writing a book, I'm trying to remember that there are people reading my books in English whose first language isn't English. So I'm trying to write in a language that's accessible for those people as well, and that's also a little difficult, because if I try to make it completely accessible to an international audience, then it looks to an American or British audience or Australian audience, English-speaking audience, it starts to look weird. But if I make it completely non-accessible, then I know I'm losing that other audience. So I'm trying to kind of find this middle ground where it's understandable for somebody who's speaking English as a second language, but also doesn't sound, bizarre. I used to do this when I worked for Tsuburaya Productions in Japan, the monster movie company. One of my main jobs was producing promotional materials for an audience who spoke English but it wasn't their native language. So I had to kind of learn to make it like that. That's not an answer to your question, but I hope it was entertaining at least.
No, it was wonderful, because it makes me understand why I rely in your book now, because it's wonderful for me. Because sometimes I get the feeling that authors who translate Shobogenzo want to pair up with Dogen, like they want to match his intelligence or his language, and that's why they use these uncommon and scholarly words or whatever. So, no, thank you very much. It was a wonderful answer.
Yeah, when you read Dogen himself, just as a follow-up, when I started reading, he's not. He uses a lot of quotations from Chinese, which were probably difficult for his lay audiences. But when he's not quoting Chinese, he's talking in a pretty normal, average language for his time. So I think it's not that obscure, you know. But you know, the great thing about the Nishijima version of Shobogenzo that makes it really good for what I'm doing and really bad for somebody who just wants to read it is that it really does do that. It matches the grammar of the. Like I can go with the Japanese Shobogenzo and his English one, and sometimes if there's a word I don't know, I can find it in the sentence just by sort of counting the words, you know, and going, okay, it's the third word in the sentence, and it usually matches directly, which is very difficult to do. This is, I think, why Mike Cross is kind of a genius, because I know he was the one who mostly worked on that part of it, that he could make it like almost this mirror reflection of the original Japanese, but that also makes it impossible to just sit and go, you know, just read it. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Speaking of Germany, we have a question from Daniela in Germany. It's actually a two-part question, and she says, comparing all of the translations, even the original Japanese one, sounds like a lot of tedious scholarly work. What was the most fun part for you in writing your book, and is there a passage that makes you smile or laugh yourself? And I'm just going to tell you the one, I think it was the one where it's about carrying the raft across the river, and you made it like going to 7-Eleven for beer and peanuts or something.
Oh yeah. yeah, that was fun to do. Yeah, it is tedious to compare all these things, but it's also, since I'm kind of a nerd about it, it's interesting. I found it real interesting because there were several excuse me. There were several passages, always minor passages, never anything really crucial to the text, where I could compare, you know, sometimes as many as 5 different English translations, and realize, oh, everybody's just guessing, you know, including Nishijima and Mike Cross, I think, because there's some parts where every version of it is completely different. So you're just going, okay, well, nobody knows what the heck he was talking about there. Those only occur in, like, sometimes they occur in these quotations he picks out from ancient Chinese and stuff, where it's really hard to figure out what he's saying. But then, you know, there's always a context around it. Most of the Shobogenzo translations are very similar. So I didn't find any huge disagreements. The fun of it was trying to figure out how to put it in a common language. And yeah, I did some goofball things like the beer and Doritos passage, and that, you know, that in particular was, he talks about, it was the original passage is something about crossing a creek to get something, I forget exactly what it was. And I thought, well, you know, if you are, there's a tendency for people who translate these things to get seduced by the amazing Oriental beauty of it all, and want to, you know, they feel, I think, so much, you know, like, oh, the plum blossoms in winter or whatever, you know, they love passages like that. Excuse me, and those things are hard for a lay audience because it just sounds like, oh, Japanese stuff. So I thought, there's no reason it has to be crossing a mountain stream, because he's just talking about an everyday activity. So what's an everyday activity that people might engage in? And I thought, well, people go, you know, across to the 7-Eleven to buy some beer and tortilla chips, you know, and that. And to me, you can make a nice substitution without losing anything essential in the writing. and so a lot of that's fun to do, and also the part that I enjoyed the most actually was about Dogen quotes a lot of poetry in the book in Shobogenzo, and I was struggling how to put these poems into my own words, and about halfway through the first draft of it, I thought, well, why don't I just make them rhyme? I just took one of them and I thought, well, I could just make this rhyme. That would be funny. Because it's a poem, and it's kind of we think of poems that don't rhyme are like the meaningful, real poetry, and then poems that do rhyme are like kids stuff, right? But I thought, well, what if I just rhyme all of the poems? And it was really hard to do because I didn't want to lose the essence of what the poem is saying, but I still wanted it to rhyme and be in poetic, iambic pentameter or whatever, poetic meter. And so it was fun to do those. I had to acquaint myself with all these. But the internet is great these days because there's several rhyming dictionaries you can find online nowadays. So I found a bunch of those that were real useful. So that was what I enjoyed most about that.
Okay, somebody wave their hands here. If you got a question, especially second group here. Wait a second. Is that a hand wave, or did you were scratching your nose? Okay. Wait a second.
I guess I'm only seeing the first group on mine.
Yeah, you're not going to see. Okay, this is going to be... Okay, wait a second. That's Vincent, yeah. Vincent is also in Europe, in Germany. No, in Holland. You're not going to see... Wait a second. I lost Vincent. Wait a second. Vincent, come back. You'll probably just hear him.
I'm here.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Okay. Well, my question, I'm not sure if it's actually a question, but one of the things I noticed here in Holland, at least in my local Sangha, we had a girl who came in and introduced herself as a practitioner of hardcore Zen.
Oh, no.
Which which I hadn't heard of before, except, of course, for your book. And I think she was quite young, actually. I think she was not even 20. So I really liked that because, obviously, she told us your books were taking her into practicing Zen. But on the other hand, she had a sort of, how to say, a bit of a sloppy way of doing things in line of, I think, what she interpreted.
Oh, yeah.
Or kind of Zen, just by the book covers and the sort of, funny way of talking about it.
Yeah.
And while there's lots of serious stuff going on in your books, of course, I wonder if you notice this, if people maybe not read thoroughly enough to actually get the second and third layers in the book. If that doesn't make sense, the question.
I wonder if that's. I wonder if I know that person. As you may know, I've traveled to the Netherlands a bunch of times, and I'm going there again this year. The only thing I have in Netherlands this year is Groningen, but I visited several cities. Nijmegen I go to all the time because I have a friend there who lets me stay at her place. So, yeah, I have seen variations on that happen where people take a kind of a superficial understanding of whatever it is I'm putting across and imagine the rest. It's kind of difficult. You can't, once you put something out, you can't really control how people are going to interpret it. I found that to be a losing battle. When I first started writing, I did spend some time trying to sort of correct people's interpretations of what I say, And nowadays I kind of just look at it when it comes to me, usually via the internet, and go, oh God. And just go, what am I going to do about that? And usually it's like, I got other things to do. So, but when I see people in person, there's an interesting sort of thing that happens. I think a lot of people, if they come to a retreat that I lead, or they just come to the regular Zazen groups, not the majority, but every once in a while I run into somebody who's really shocked and upset that it's so traditional. I mean, I do have a T-shirt that has Godzilla on it right now, but other than those kind of superficial things, the way I teach this stuff tends to be pretty traditional. There's people have this image of me as this great iconoclast, but I think it's not really true. A lot of stuff I put across is straight up traditional Zen stuff, especially when it comes to ceremonies. People get a little bent out of shape once I start doing ceremonies. They're like, what are you doing ceremonies for? Well, we do these ceremonies as part of the tradition. So yeah, I know there's going to be a certain amount of that misunderstanding. There's all kinds of it. There's stuff that you write and you see how people interpret it, and it's wildly wrong. I did a where is it sitting? It was over here. Well, it doesn't matter. There was a book that came out a number of years ago called Zigzag Zen, which I really criticized heavily in my book Hardcore Zen, because it was one of these books where it's trying to put across the idea that the real way to understand Buddhism properly is to take LSD and ayahuasca and MDMA and whatever else. Very harsh, very advocating that. Most of the people in the book advocate that. And I took it to task. And gutsy author that he was, the Alan Hunt Badiner, I think is his name, he was coming out with a second edition, and he asked me to contribute to it. There it is. They sent me a copy of it with my thing in it. The second edition is unfortunately, look at this thing. It's much worse. The original one was put together by Chronicle Books, and it's a beautiful piece of work in the printing and everything. And then they reissued it, and it's, I don't know who published this, but it's like falling apart. I've only even looked at it a couple of times, and it's already coming apart from its binding. But anyway, I put an essay in here in which I tried to express as best I could my feelings about drugs and their place in the Dharma, which is pretty, negative. I think if somebody wants to get high and they say, look, I'm smoking this weed to get high, I can actually respect that. I mean, respect is probably a funny word, but I understand that and I get it, and I don't have any real strong argument with that. What I have an argument with is I'm going to do this MDMA and have enlightenment. There I will argue with you. Anyway, that's what I kind of tried to put across in the piece of writing. And I saw a review of it, and the guy is going, Brad Warner says drugs are fine for the Dharma, but with these caveats. I'm like, really? Really? That's what you got out of this? So I just thought, you try your best to say something, and people are just going to read whatever they read in it. And so then you put out another book and hope that they read that one. Yeah, I'm sorry she was sloppy, but if she's only 20 years old, that could be also part of it, because I was pretty sloppy about Zen when I was 20, and I still am in some ways.
Brad, our Sangha reaches to a lot of people in exotic and isolated locations. We have someone, if I recall, they're from a place really in the boondocks. It's called Ohio.
Oh, I've heard of Ohio.
Yeah. His question, this is from Washu. He's at home. He says, since we have no idea who Shobo Genzo was written for, who do you think should read it, or who would get the most out of it?
Ah, that's it. I like that question. Thank you, Ohio. You're making me proud. Because that's a question I've thought about myself. Because it's sort of like, if Dogen isn't relevant, then there's really no need to study him. You know, there's plenty of philosophers out there who put across things that, you know, these days we can look at and go, yeah, that was stupid. Some of them we might be right about, and some of them we might be wrong about. You know, there may be somebody who we currently regard as being kind of worthless, that in 50 or 100 years people will be going, yeah, we didn't realize that guy was so smart. But I feel Dogen is relevant, and I think he can be relevant for anybody who's interested in the deeper meaning of life. You know, we look at a lot of philosophers whose stuff is very old. You know, Plato and Socrates and things like that. People still read even now, and they're much older than Dogen, and they still have something to say to us, even though they're so ancient and so removed. And I think Dogen is one of those people. Even though he lived and died 800 years ago in a country that most of us haven't encountered. I've encountered it, but most Westerners haven't even encountered Japan, really. He has something to say, and it's quite forward for its time. I remember having conversations with Nishijima about this very aspect of Dogen, and Nishijima was convinced that Dogen was, he wouldn't go so far as to say Dogen was psychic or anything, but he felt that Dogen intuitively understood a lot of things that we are only just now catching up with. You know, one of his favorite examples would be certain elements of psychology, that Dogen seems to be expressing a very contemporary take on certain aspects of human psychology, but in words, he's struggling for the words to express these concepts because his language and his time didn't have words for that. So you find a lot of that kind of stuff, and so I think it can be useful for anybody. I think it's, you know, one of the things Dogen encourages is a meditation practice. And I remember Nishijima was very interested in existentialism, and was quite fond of the existentialist European philosophers. And he would say things along the lines of, you know, if these people had only had a practice, they could have taken the next leap. So to me, that's another example of our own Western philosophy just starting to catch up with where Dogen was. So what Dogen has is his philosophy. It has in a lot of points has a lot of close points with existentialism and phenomenology and some of the stuff I don't even know about because I'm not a philosophy guy. But he also combines this with a meditation practice, with Zazen, and that allows him to get more deeply into the philosophy. So I think really anybody who's interested can approach this, and I'm kind of hoping that people will read the book with an interest in the philosophical points it expresses, and then say, oh yeah, maybe I should try some of this Zazen stuff, and maybe get into that as well, because I really do feel that Zazen has a lot to offer us in our contemporary world.
All right, wave your hands or moon us or do something so we know you want to have a quick...
I'd just like to interject quickly, Brad. You just said something really cool about Nishijima, that the existentialists would have benefited from a meditation practice. Because this, have you read Nishitani's Religion and Nothingness? He was one of the Kyoto school folks. And this was, you know, the group of Japanese guys in the late 19th and early 20th centuries who studied the European existentialists. Mm-hmm. And Nishitani basically says exactly what you just said and what Nishijima said, that, gee, existentialism is awesome, but it kind of arrives at there's nothing, or
Yeah.
God is dead, when actually if you meditate and realize the unity of practice and meditation, you realize oneness and suchness.
Yeah.
Yugen is one of our
That was
thinkers.
great. Thank you.
I'm trying to break him of the habit. So
Okay.
let me ask anyone has a question. Wave your hands real quick, or this is your chance. Ah, Virginia. All right. Her name's Virginia. She's not in Virginia. I don't think you're.
Where are you, in Virginia?
New York, upstate.
Oh, okay.
Thank you very much for writing your book. I found it, I've been pecking away at Shobogenzo little by little for years, and your book has really just made it much more accessible and a lot of fun, too. Just enjoy the humor in it. I was wondering what the most difficult part for you was to write, because I know some of it was still difficult, you know, the mirrors and the monkeys and that, and I was wondering if that was difficult for you to get through.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, it's
maybe talk a little bit about some of the tougher Dogen.
It is tough, especially like I wrote the book and then it did all the editing and all this stuff. So it's been a year, at least more than a year probably, since I tried this. And just last week I started working on the second version, second edition, whatever it is. And I remembered how hard this was. Because I can really, if I'm writing a normal book, I can get a few thousand words out in a day. With a book like this, it's lucky if I can get a couple hundred in a day, because it's just going back and forth and checking things, and the most difficult bits are really mundane. It's because of for example, this is so mundane, but when things are written in Chinese characters, the Chinese characters in Japanese don't have a fixed pronunciation, so you don't know how the word is pronounced, which makes it really difficult to look it up. And so I've discovered some online things that they're trying to make it easier to look up Chinese characters, but they're quite finicky, I've discovered, and they haven't quite got all the bugs out. So spending 10 or 20 minutes just looking up one Chinese character is tough. But then philosophically, you also have things like just to take the example you raised, is this near the end, that monkeys and mirrors thing. That was one of the passages, one of the chapters where I noticed several wildly different interpretations of certain lines, and I had to kind of try to figure out what way I'm going to go with it, because I am very loyal to my teacher, but I don't want to be one of those guys who just kind of, my country right or wrong, kind of person. With regard to Nishijima, I want to be critical of him as well, and give all the other interpretations a chance, and try to see why they changed it. And if you read the book, I make the case several times that I think the Nishijima interpretation is best, because and it's slightly embarrassing to me, because I wish often that there would be a passage where I found the Tanahashi translation to be better than the Nishijima translation, because then I wouldn't look like such a culty, But when I go back to the original Japanese, I go, well, that's Nishijima and Mike Cross got it right, and the others seem to be going off in a different direction with it. so just trying to make all that work is tough. And that monkeys and mirrors thing. There's the whole thing about the eternal mirror and the clear mirror, and trying to figure out why he keeps saying the clear mirror and the eternal mirror, but then they both seem to be the same thing, and then just going, well, you know, there's certain parts where I had to go, I don't know what the hell he's saying. Not overall, usually. I mean, I feel like I have a grasp on the overall thrust of Shobo Genzo, but there are lines and passages where I'm just kind of going, I don't know what the hell you're talking about, Dogen. Sometimes I have the luxury, because I'm doing a paraphrase, that I can skip those and just kind of go on to another thing. But I do often, there's a lot of stuff, you know, on the cutting room floor, as they say in movie business, where I have spent a lot of time trying to figure something out, and then just gone, I don't know what this means, so I'm just going to skip over it. And usually those passages are noted in the little commentary at the end, like, I skipped over a big part here. Also interesting is, as I alluded to before, there are parts where I can tell, just from working on it so closely, that I'm not the only one who doesn't understand this. And I know that if you are presenting a translation, it's kind of not done to admit, I don't know what this means. But I like having the freedom in the type of work that I'm doing to be able to say, Dogen says this, that, and the other thing. I don't know what this means.
Brett, if you ever have a question about a passage you don't know what Dogen means, just write me and I'll fill you in.
Okay, thank you.
Actually, when I write to people, I compare Dogen to a jazz musician, and I say he was just like riffing, and sometimes he got lost in his music. I don't even think he knew what he meant all the time.
I do get that impression sometimes, yeah.
Let me give you a question that ties into that from Shoka, who's writing from home. And she says, first, the history of the books was fascinating. Thank you for that. It wasn't boring at all. My question is, after spending time reading through the different translations, do you have any suggestion on the best way to approach picking a translation or reading through multiple translations at once for people who want to read Dogen? I guess she's asking, what's the best way to read Dogen?
Yeah. Well, I can just tell you what I did, and that's also covered in the book, but I can say it. My experience of Shobo Genzo was going to Nishijima Roshi's lectures, which he'd do every Saturday, and I attended, you know, almost every one while I was living there, and listening to him talk about Shobo Genzo. And after a while of listening to him just talk about Shobo Genzo, I thought, well, you know, he's selling him. I might as well buy a set and read it. I think when I first bought it, there was only volume 1 and 2 available, but I bought them anyway and read them. And partway through that, I realized I don't know what's going on. You know, I'm getting lost. But instead of just stopping, I decided I'll just plow through it. You know, I'll just read it, scan my eyes across the page, make the words, you know, repeat themselves in my brain, and just do it that way, even if I don't understand what it's saying, and just get through it. And I found that was sort of useful, because there were certain things where I did it that way, and then later on I kind of remembered a passage and went, oh yeah, now I get what that means. So that's one way. The Nishijima version, as I said, is not. It's the best translation, and it's also not very user friendly. It's the best translation because it's the most literal translation. It slightly burns me up occasionally when I come across some scholar kind of. No scholars ever say anything really bad about the Nishijima translation, but they'll sort of class it as like, well, there's this translation and that translation and the Nishijima translation, as if they're all like, meh, whatever. And I'm like, no, you're full of caca, sir. The Nishijima translation, if you actually spend any time with it, the Nishijima cross translation, I should say, giving Mike Cross his due credit. Is really is really much better as a literal translation than anybody else's. It's just that that very fact makes it really difficult. The one I often recommend to people, slightly reluctantly, but I know Kazuaki Tanahashi now, and he's a nice guy, is I usually recommend, if you're just starting with Shobo Genzo, you'll have a much easier time reading the Kazuaki Tanahashi translations than the Nishijima cross translations, because Tanahashi was working with a lot of people from the San Francisco Zen Center who were themselves professional writers and poets, and they know how to make language, sing beautifully, and so you can kind of read Shobo Genzo in the Tanahashi translations very easily, and the meaning is not radically different from what you get out of the Nishijima and cross version. There's a couple bits here and there where it gets a little different, but not in what seemed to me to be the crucial, meat and potatoes sort of passages. They're pretty much the same. So that's one thing. Work with an easier translation first. That might be a good way to start. I would also caution people, don't exclusively rely on my on something like Don't Be a Jerk. Don't Be a Jerk is sort of intended as a starter to get you, if you're serious about Shobo Genzo, to get you kind of started in Shobo Genzo, rather than to be the final word on it. It's not really intended to be the final word on Shobo Genzo at all. It's because, as I said, I eliminated a lot of passages. Yeah, I said just in the last question, I talked about eliminating passages because I didn't understand them. I only did that, 3 or 4 times in the whole book. But I did eliminate a lot of passages because I thought he was being repetitive. Or for example, hitting a point which I think most people these days already get. For example, in his chapter about feminism, Raihai Tokuzui, where he, prostrating to that which has attained the marrow, where he really takes this strong view of male-female equality. He really pounds that into the ground in the original chapter out, not because I didn't understand it or because I didn't think it was good or anything, but just because we get it, Dogen. But I think he was addressing an audience of Japanese people in the 1200s who probably would have had a very hard time with that idea. It would be like trying to go to Saudi Arabia and talk about, male-female equality. You're talking to an audience who are just going to go, what? Men and women are equally smart? So he has to really hit them over the head with it. But because I've picked and chose. If you go to a more standard translation, you'll find all the bits that I left out, and maybe you'll say, oh, he left out the most important part. So I'd advise people to look at a more standard translation for that reason.
Brad, if I could jump in with one point of procedure here. You use the word caca, and we don't go for.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Please watch your speech when you're here.
Okay.
Okay. Right speech. All right. Listen. Somebody. First I got to ask Brad. Brad, can you give us another 20-25 minutes, or you got to get to the dentist?
I don't have to get to the dentist, but I kind of have to pee. So I'll go as long as I can.
Okay. Or you can take us with you as you're doing it, and we can take the stone.
I don't think that would be pretty.
Okay, somebody wave your arms like crazy. I kind of wish Sergey in Ukraine would have a question, just because I like to always say we have a question from Sergey in the Ukraine, but nothing, Sergey? All right, somebody wave your okay. Arino Shingen.
Hello, Brad. Again, thank you. This has been fantastic. Actually, it's been interesting because you've kind of covered my question as we've gone along, but my question is, I sit with a local sitting group, and they always say, why are Zen books so difficult to understand? And the Shobo Genzo can be one of those books.
Yeah.
And so my question is, why do you think Dogen wrote the Shobogenzo to be so elusive? Did he do this to challenge us, to really make us, dig deep for something? Or did he just kind of, as Jindo also talks about it, he's just kind of having his own personal flair with it and having fun? So I just want to
I think it's a bit of both. I don't think Dogen is ever. There's a certain kind of pretentiousness that creeps into some contemporary Zen writing, and I will not name names, where I think that the authors are being deliberately obscure for whatever reasons they have. I can think of a few people in particular who, when I read them, I go, you're just trying to sound Zen. Stop it. I don't get the impression Dogen was doing that, but he was trying to express, the inexpressible, and he's trying to bend language into a way of expressing something that language isn't really equipped to express. This is why you get all the contradictions, because in terms of language, when I'm communicating something to you, I have to say, get me the orange bucket, and so that you know which bucket to pick up and get me, And so I have to be very specific, and I have to eliminate it. But even in something as mundane as an orange bucket, the orange bucket is many things other than an orange bucket. Now I sound like a Zenny or something, but the orange bucket could be described as the rusty bucket, or it could be described as the big bucket, or, there's a lot of other aspects, but you choose just one of those aspects and you address it. And that's how language works. When it gets to bigger sort of philosophical points, everything gets very mixed up, and you're trying to say it's all one thing. It's as if, to take a musical metaphor, you've got a chord, that's composed of 5 or 6 notes. It's a complex jazz chord, let's say, for Jundo's sake. Those chords has a lot of notes in it, but you got to just pick one of those and describe that note. And because the language forces you to just pick one note at a time to describe. So I think there's a lot of that where he's just saying something, and he is trying to challenge the audience a bit to get out of that area of just fixating on one thing and thinking that one thing is reality. And also, I agree with Jundo. He does kind of riff around, and he does these funny wordplay things. This is something that's missing, and it's completely understandable that it's missing. But one of the things that's missing from any standard translation is the humor of Dogen, which there's no way you can read some of these passages in Japanese. There's no way I can read them and not feel like he's actually making a joke here. But the jokes don't translate because they're puns and they're linguistic things. But I feel like sometimes in Shobogenzo he's going for a laugh, and when a scholar reads it 800 years and several continents removed, the laugh is completely gone, and they express it as like, I'm trying to do this with my facial expression. They're like, the wonderful, lotus blossom in the winter, or whatever. I already did the plum blossom in the winter. So that he's the jokes get lost, and yeah, I think he's I don't think he's trying to be obscure. I think sometimes he's going a little bit beyond his audience, and just hoping maybe a few of them will come along for the ride. And he might be challenging. He's certainly a cantankerous fellow. You certainly get that from reading him, where there's a lot of footnotes in Don't Be a Jerk where I have to say he really said that, because people will think I'm trying to be all punk rock or something, but he is saying that's a really stupid question, but I'll answer it anyway. There's some places in Bendoa where he says stuff like that. Yeah.
Let me ask a question from Alice at home, because it ties in with what you just said. She said,
okay.
Dogen wrote to talk. She wants to know the later chapters of Dogen. I guess she means the last 12 chapters. So Dogen wrote to talk to his monks, who were often uncouth, illiterate young guys. What do you think about that? And also, what did you think about in those later chapters that Dogen was a hard ass? What's your? And by the way, notice I just said the word hard ass.
Yeah, you shouldn't say that.
That contains ass. Okay.
Oh. As in donkey? So yeah, those later chapters are something there's a lot of controversy and stuff, and to be honest, it's been a while since I've actually read them, but I kind of know the basic contents. For those of you who don't know, in his later passages, he's directly addressing the monks in both Eiheiji and the other temple. Anyway, the other temple that he led. I think that's an important point. What she asked, that we sort of have pop culture and movies and things present us this idealized version of the Buddhist monk as this kind of intellectual, very settled person who's like got his stuff together and he's just working on this great problem of life, when really Dogen's monks were there were probably a few of those in his group, but I get the impression by and large that was not who he was talking to. They were mostly young guys, and when they we in the West these days will throw around that phrase taking refuge in the Dharma, as if it's a metaphor. And I don't think in the 1200s in Japan, under the samurai rule, taking refuge in the Dharma was not a metaphor. It was actually a taking refuge situation, almost exactly like what we're seeing in Europe with these people from the Middle East. They're escaping a really bad situation and trying to find a place that will protect them from it. So I think a lot of people entered Zen monasteries not because of great spiritual aspirations, but just because they didn't want to get involved with the hellish situation that was going on in wherever they lived. So he's addressing this group of people, and one of the things he really does is he tries to encourage them in their practice, and he'll say things which seem to directly contradict other things he said. For example, he'll say, only a monk can realize the truth of Buddhism, only an ordained monk. And he's saying this to an audience of ordained monks who are having a hell of a time up in the mountains, and it's snowy, and if they leave the mountains, they might get their head chopped off or their leg chopped off. So he's really trying his best to encourage those people. And we read this in our comfortable later days, and we go, oh, does Dogen mean you have to be a monk, or does Dogen mean anybody can do it? And I think he meant both. But this is the way I read it anyway. That the potential for realizing the Buddhist truth is inherent in every human being. But sometimes you gotta, when people have committed themselves to a monastic lifestyle, the part of the duty of the teacher is to give them strong encouragement and tell them, yeah, you guys made the right choice coming up here to this mountain. And so there's that. I don't know. Does that an answer? Maybe not.
We're getting to the end here. Any questions, especially from the group 2 here? Somebody, wave your hands. It's your chance. All right. Okay.
Can't see group 2 at all, but we'll.
You will. Somebody. Rodney.
Sorry.
Wait a second. I got to push this button first, and then I got to push this one. Here. Wait a second. And then you can kind of see him. There he is. Go ahead.
Thanks, Brad. My question is, of all the chapters of Shobogenzo, is there any one particular one that's influenced you the most?
Of all the chapters of Shobogenzo, is there anyone that's influenced me the most? Yeah, I mean, the obvious ones like Genjo Koan and Fukan Zazengi were very influential, but the one the one I find I have a lot of fondness for is the one I'm working with right now, which is in the Nishijima Cross version. In most standard versions, it occurs in the second volume of Shobogenzo, and it's called Inmo, which is Nishijima translates it as it, and the more standard sort of normal translators usually go suchness or thusness, something like that. To me, it addresses. I did a whole book, mostly influenced by Immo, called "There Is No God and He Is Always With You," and I feel like, for somebody like me who grew up in the West, I was not raised in a religious family, so my family's view of God was very sort of vague. We were probably some sort of Protestant, but nobody went to church and nobody cared. So we were Protestant by the fact that we weren't Jewish and we weren't Catholic, so we must be Protestant. You know, that was the extent of the Warner family commitment to religion. So I didn't have a real indoctrination in God. But as I got a little older into my, once you're starting to emerge out of, full-on childhood, when I was about 10 or 11 years old, I started getting really, really interested in this idea of God. Like, what is God? Who are all these people who talk about God and believe in God? What the heck is God? So I got very interested in that. Ended up with a religion that doesn't have a God, and I was sort of like, oh, well, okay, this one doesn't have a God. But as I started working with Dogen and then looking at some of the, for example, the Christian mystics and a little bit of the Kabbalah, but not a whole lot of it, but other people in other traditions that talk about God, and then comparing it specifically, especially to that chapter of Shobogenzo Inmo, I'm going, well, it looks to me like Dogen and these ancient Christian mystics like St. John of the Cross and Pseudo-Dionysius and other people like that, Eugenia, they're using the word God, and Dogen is using this word Inmo, which is a very sort of hard to define word. In his Japanese version, he compares it to the Japanese word are, or ano, which, if you know Japanese, is just sort of like that thing over there, So it's a word we don't really have in English so much, but it's sort of like that, but he's using this word that, or that thing, or thingamajig, to refer to something that the Christians refer to as God, and the Jews and the Muslims refer to as God, some of them. And obviously not an anthropomorphized God, but he's talking about an aspect of the universe which is intelligent and can be said to have some sort of a will and a drive of its own. So I started to go, well, this idea of Buddhism being godless isn't exactly true. It's non. There's no deity in Buddhism, or at least, I mean, there are deities occasionally, but they're not. They're sort of used metaphorically. But there is this idea of that this isn't simply a mechanistic dead universe we're living in. We are part of something much bigger that can be sometimes, if we want to, considered as a unity, as a unit, and we can say, that, as I keep saying, the Christians, Jews, and Muslims prefer the word God to talk about this, and Dogen uses this word Inmo to talk about it, and I find that one really fascinating, and I like that one because it sort of allows, to me, a cultural sort of in. I don't feel like I'm dealing with something so absolutely foreign anymore. I'm dealing with something that we can talk about in terms that Western people can understand. Yeah, you can be an atheist and believe in God if you're a Buddhist, which I think is an interesting little dichotomy. I'm not the first one who said that, but I think that's actually true.
in respect to Brad's bladder, we're going to make this the very brief last
Thank
question.
you.
He is getting older, so we you know he needs to several times a day now. But first off, if anyone has a question, you can catch him on Facebook, I guess, and he answers sometimes if he's in the mood. And I was going to say you can answer on your blog, but it's not there anymore. After years of fun, you've eliminated the comment section.
Oh, it got weird. I mean, it got weird a lot of different times, but it was getting especially weird, and I just thought get rid of it. But if you go on hardcorezen.info, there is a contact page, and you can send me emails, and I try to answer all of those. I don't answer every Facebook comment because it just gets bizarre in there. But when it's an email, I answer it.
Here's the last question. It's from Lisa Yokon. She says, you knew Nishijima Roshi well. I guess you did. Do you have any good stories to share with us about him that kind of captures who he was?
Oh, God. I don't know. He was an interesting guy, and I can't, I knew him. And I would say at some level we were friends, but we were so culturally removed from each other that, we didn't have a lot of, other than Dogen, we didn't have a lot of interests in common. So it wasn't like we were hanging out or anything. But I did towards the end of my stay in Japan, I had a lot more contact with him, and I would actually stay overnight at his little tiny apartment and stuff like that. Well, I can just tell one story that I found really interesting. Towards the end of his life, his wife had died. He was living alone in this little tiny apartment. He had a kind of a person who I only met once who would kind of show up. I don't know if she showed up every day, but at least a few times a week to make sure his everything was he had everything he needed and whatnot. Sort of a semi-caretaker, kind of looker-after person. But he didn't like to cook for himself. He was one of those typical Japanese guys who never really learned to cook. So he was living in an area where there was some convenience stores and restaurants and things around, and he basically took all of his meals by either going and buying something at the convenience store or getting it at a local restaurant and usually bringing it home. And what really fascinated me is every single meal that I ever saw him sit down to, he chanted the full Buddhist meal verse. Busho kapira jodo makada seppo harana nyu metsukuchira nyorai oryoki. He would do this in front of a little plastic package of inari sushi from the convenience store with its little disposable chopsticks attached to it. He'd do the full Buddhist meal chant before every meal. And I found that really touching. I haven't adopted that myself. But I just found that amazing, and I'm sure he did that. I'm sure that wasn't for my benefit. I'm sure he did that every time. In fact, he did it sometimes when I'd be like, "Well, I already ate, but you go ahead," and he'd just do the meal chant before he ate his food. He was really committed to Zen and to the Buddhist lifestyle as a whole thing. It wasn't just something he put on for an hour a day or something. He was full on.
Well, let me close here. Nishijima Roshi is up on our altar there, and I got a hunch he would think we did good here tonight. So
we're good.
Thank you, boss man.
Yeah.
Brad, you are a honored and cherished guest here.
Well, thank you.
You're Mishpuka. You're part of the family, and we hope you come back. Not only your next book, anytime you wish.
Okay, thank you.
And that includes my house here in Japan. Next time you're here.
Okay.
Love that this went well, and I guess that's it. You can get to the bathroom now. So,
thank you.
We'll say goodnight to everybody, but Shingen, would you give us, if Brad's bladder can hold on a second, Shingen, would you close the sutras for us?
Sure.
May the merits of these teachings penetrate into each thing in all places, so that we and every sentient being together may realize the Buddha's way. All Buddhas throughout space and time. All Bodhisattvas, Mahasattva, Maha, Vajna, Paramita.
Okay, thank you, Brad. Thank you, everybody, and good night, good morning, wherever you are. See you later.
Thank you. See ya. I'm going to run.